A food forest helps cultivate the 9 noble virtues, or even better yet, will help you connect and deepen your weird consciousness. Hail and welcome. I'm Matt Sargent, and this is Iwa's Initiations. Thanks for tuning in. If you want to honor the land, connect with your ancestors, witness the gods, and save Midgard, you're in the right place. If it's your first time, welcome. Hit the subscribe button, then turn on the bell. That way you'll get notifications for every future episode, because if you're into any of those things, honoring the land, connecting with your ancestors, witnessing the gods, or saving Midgard, this is the community where we're going to share with each other ways to do that. And one of the primary tools that I highly encourage every heathen to build is a sacred food forest. And we haven't really gone over the food forest yet. We're going to cover that in a little bit, and we're also going to cover how it strengthens the cultivates the 9 noble virtues, as well as even better, maybe cultivating weird consciousness. If you're into that, you should be. However, a few things to get out of the way first. I've noticed through the analytics that most of you are finding these videos through Facebook. That tells me a lot of you are using Facebook. And my goal is to create a community of heathens that want to save Midgard. So I have created the Facebook group, Iwa's Initiations. There will be a link in the show notes. Join the group. That way we can all talk about what we're doing to make Midgard a better place for our descendants. Also, I announced last week that once this community has 1,000 subscribers, and that tells me that there's some interest in this mission to save Midgard, I made an oath. And as a heathen, I highly respect oaths. Jesse Stillwagon from Midgard Musings has a great video about the value and importance and sacredness of an oath. Click this card and you can check it out. But oaths are serious, and I made an oath that if there's 1,000 subs, I'll start a nonprofit organization with the aim of bringing a 20 or larger acre food forest to every state in the country outside of a metropolitan area. I'd love to see it get bigger than that, have them outside of every area, and have 5 to 10 acres of food production, and then 10 to 20, 40 acres of more wild land, just to create beneficial habitat for the other inhabitants of Jord here on Midgard, the other creatures of Jord. I can only do this with your support. I don't want to spearhead this necessarily. I know it needs to be done, and I'm just trying to create a community. So that's what the Facebook group is for. If you're in any of that, just let me know what your thoughts are. Leave some comments. Now the meat and potatoes. I'm going to have a real quick overview of what this food forest is, because I've been talking about an eco garden. An eco garden and a food forest are the same thing in my mind, basically. And there's a myriad of ways of designing this and a lot of details that we'll get into over coming episodes. But basically, the eco garden or a food forest is a production area that produces food, fiber, fuel, and medicine that's mimicked after nature. And if we take the model of a forest, we'll find that these are highly productive areas that are also self-fertile. So as the system gets older, it actually becomes more fertile. So it requires less inputs over time. And that's great, super beneficial for the environment, as you're not having to bring in outside sources. And as the trees grow, and you can see this tree behind me, the leaves are turning yellow. That means that the leaves are about to fall. When they hit the ground, they decompose. All of the soil organisms start eating them, and it becomes better topsoil. Well, imagine once this whole thing's planted out. I'm in the infancy stages. I'm just planting trees. Most of the trees I have are little baby trees. All great things start small, and all forests started small at one point. But basically, within the food forest, a lot of people will tell you there's 7 layers. There's actually 9 layers in a food forest, and to me that's kind of interesting, because we all know that 9 carries a significant value in heathenry and northern Germanic spiritual practices. But basically, foregoing more intense design, you have a canopy layer, your really big trees. You have a mid canopy, the smaller trees. Then you have a shrub layer. You have an herbaceous layer. You have ground cover. You have root crops, you have vine crops, you have fungi, and some sort of water. And you don't need all of them at once, but the ultimate goal is to have that. And I'll be showing you how to incorporate all of those elements into a food forest in later episodes. I just kind of wanted a brief overview of what they are, because it's important to understand. And once you envision that, and you can kind of see what a forest is, or a food forest is in your mind, and I'll actually probably have some sort of link to someone else's food forest in the show notes, so check that out. But it gives you a really good idea of how actually beyond sustaining this system can be, and be actually regenerative. But how does planting one, starting one, maintaining one, cultivate the 9 noble virtues, and even better yet, weird consciousness? We're going to get into that. So the 9 noble virtues, although they're a modern construct, they're what a lot of heathens who are newer to the path recognize and idealize as guiding points of heathenry. Again, Jesse over at Midgard Musings recently had a great video about the 9 noble virtues, so check that out. I think there's a lot of value in them, and living by them is a great way to just be a better person in general. And creating a food forest will help cultivate them. And you might be wondering, what is this weird consciousness that he keeps talking about? Well, if you check out Valerie Wright's book, Forn Thrifa, The Art of Healing, their Ancient Healing Touch, I'll have a link to an Amazon link to it in the show notes. If you buy it, it's a great book. I might get like 10 cents, so help support the cause, help me plant more trees. It's a really good book, but she lays out weird consciousness is a combination of Hurmo, Fornsid, and Utasita. So Hurmo would be high-mindedness, acting in the benefit of others. Fornsid would be ancient ways, ancient knowledge, and Utasita would be your outsitting or meditation. A forest garden is a great place to practice your Utasita, and we'll get into the rest after we cover the 9 noble virtues. The first of the 9 noble virtues is courage. And it takes courage to start a food forest. It can be a daunting task, especially if you're a novice gardener. That said, when it comes down to it, they're easier to maintain than an annual garden. They still require work though. And it also takes courage because you're going to be transforming your landscape into something the average person isn't used to seeing. And I'd love it for it to be more commonplace. It's far more beneficial ecologically than, say, a just lawn, because you have biodiversity, you have multiple layers in the canopy, mid-canopy, so you have all sorts of habitat for birds and all sorts of critters, really. And it bringing in those other animals, those wild animals, and creating homes for them actually is part of what improves the fertility of the system. But it takes courage because it's not normal. And when you do something courageous, even though it seems small, that helps make other courageous tasks seem easier. Truth. Well, the food forest and cultivating truth might seem like a bit of a stretch, but you have to, when you start one and you maintain one, you learn the truth that Yord knows best. The Earth Mother really knows what she's doing, and what we've done agriculturally or even in the suburbs just with lawns is really just a waste of energy. It's not regenerative, it's not even sustainable, and it requires lots of work, lots of inputs for little yield. And it doesn't benefit the other members, the other inhabitants of Midgard. So maintaining and creating a food forest helps you acknowledge truth, honor. Again, this is kind of hand in hand with truth, but it's an honorable thing to do, because the more of us that do this, the better Midgard's going to be for our descendants. It might still be inhabitable, but and that's an honorable thing to do. To make the world a better place for your offspring and their offspring is highly honorable. Fidelity. You have to be faithful to any landscape that you are saying that you will be a steward for. And again, going back to the small act of courageousness increases courage overall. Same with fidelity. If you are loyal and faithful to the land that you are stewarding and treat it right, that makes makes acts of fidelity for loved ones, your spouse, your children, easier in the long run. Discipline. It takes discipline to embrace the fact that you have to take care of something, and once it's established, a food forest might not require daily maintenance, but you still need to interact with it. It's something that provides for you, but you also need to provide for and maintain. The sheer act of having something that is dependent on you, especially in the beginning stages when things are establishing, requires discipline. Hospitality. It's one of the main tenets of heathenry, whether you follow the 9 noble virtues or not. The Havamal really focuses on being hospitable, and we should all be following the sayings of the High One. And a food forest helps you be more hospitable, because once it's established and it's abundant and you have apples and pears and plums and whatever fruit grows in your neck of the woods, maybe nuts, walnuts, pecans, almonds, all sorts of different food can grow in a forest. And then you've got stuff from the ground cover, which would be most of your annual vegetables, root crops, potatoes, etc. Like the list goes on. These things can be so incredibly abundant. Once you have that abundant, being hospitable is way easier, because yeah, you invite a stranger in, you invite a friend in, you have food to share with them. Even better yet, if you know what you're doing, you can take apples or honey or pears or strawberries, any of these things that can come out of the food forest, and you can make booze out of them. And it's always good to offer guests booze. Industriousness. Creating a food forest requires industriousness. You look at the landscape, you look at how you can alter it ever so slightly to create better water retention, or even more evenly distribute water, etc. And a lot of times you'll find yourself, oh, I want to build a bridge over this little creek I have in the garden, or I want to put an archway or a pergola in. These are all things that can allow you to embrace your industrious nature. 8, self-reliance. Well, it's pretty evident that if you're producing your own food, fiber, fuel, and medicine, that it encourages you to be more self-reliant and rely on other people less, because you are becoming a producer instead of a consumer. And this ties hand in hand with one of the tenets of permaculture, and permaculture is kind of a movement that really promotes these food forests. But the founding father of permaculture, Bill Mollison, said, and I'm going to botch the quote a little bit, so I'll put it on the screen in case I say it wrong, but he basically said, if only 10% of the population shifted from being consumers to producers, that would be producing more than enough food, fiber, fuel, and medicine to go around, and the world would be a much better place. It kind of goes hand in hand with heathenry, because if you're self-reliant and you're producing and you're hospitable, you're helping your neighbors out, you're helping your brothers out, you're helping your kin out, and that in all will make the world a better place. And you're doing it in a way that creates habitat and food for other species, so you're benefiting the planet too. Sounds like a win-win to me. Perseverance. To garden it all, whether you have a traditional annual garden, raised beds, straight crops, straight rows of crops, etc., or a more natural wild food forest, it takes perseverance. It can be a grind, it requires dedication, and you're in it for the long haul. If you look at the Yarrow Rune, I know it in Futhork by E. Thorson, he talks about part of a Yarrow is it's the harvest, and I don't think he talks about this part, I don't know where I picked it up, but part of a good harvest is not only a good harvest for food for this year, it's also food for your livestock if you have livestock, but it's also the seeds for the next year, which sets up a good harvest for the next year. So This really is all about perseverance, because if you're self-reliant and you're providing for yourself, it's about persevering. Now on to the headier part, weird consciousness that I talked about a little earlier. Um, Again, you can learn more in Valerie Wright's book. The link is in the show notes. I highly recommend it. It's a great book. Even if you don't want to learn healing touch, there's a lot of good information about ancient heathen traditions in it. But she outlines the process of becoming weird consciousness is a combination of Uramo, foreign seed, and Utasita. Utasita is basically sitting out with the intention of gaining insight from the divine, generally in a natural place. A food forest is a great place to do it, because it has elements of the wild, and they're generally peaceful. For me, my burgeoning food forest is my Hof. It's where I practice my Utasita, and I know you'll find a deep connection in that place if you don't have a good place for Utasita. But as far as Uramo and foreign seed, Uramo is high-mindedness, and it's not acting for low self, it's acting for high self. And basically the nine noble virtues came from a combination of Uramo practices and foreign seed. And foreign seed would be ancient ways or ancient knowledge. But you can see how if you're being high-minded, that leads to hospitality, that leads to industriousness, it leads to perseverance. And we've already covered how a food forest encapsulates all that. It also, cultivating a food forest also cultivates Uramo by you're basically you're doing something that benefits you, but you're doing it because it benefits the planet, it benefits your wild neighbors, it creates habitat for them. It's a very high-minded act. Yes, you'll get something out of it, but the earth gets so much more out of it than you do. And then as far as ancient ways, Valerie Wright talks about in her book about how this is knowing law, knowing the lore, etc. And yeah, you're not going to necessarily learn the lore or learn ancient law by sitting in a food forest or working on a food forest, but you have to remember all of our ancestors were agrarian. Even the raiders, they were farmers when they weren't raiding, and raiding supplemented their farming, which is interesting to think about. But just growing your own food and being self-reliant you're going to be embarking in these ancient ways. And yes, our ancestors might not have grown food forests. There's strong evidence that a lot of acorns were planted purposefully, and a lot of people don't realize, but acorns are a great food source, and they were a staple of early man all across the globe, wherever acorns grew, wherever oaks grew. So by embracing some agrarian practices, you're embracing ancient ways and being self-reliant. With that said, let me know what you thought. Thanks for tuning in. Like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you next time.